The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with whispers and clicks of disapproval as Jack Stone walked toward the speaking platform. His boots made soft thuds against the polished floor, echoing through the vast chamber. The human ambassador wore a simple black suit that stood out among the colorful robes and biomechanical enhancements of the other species. Above him, hundreds of different alien representatives watched from their floating platforms. Some used environmental bubbles to survive in the standard atmosphere, while others required mechanical assistance just to move. They all shared one thing: the certainty that they were about to witness another foolish human attempt at the impossible. The head counselor, a tall being with silvery skin that rippled like water, raised all four hands for silence. "Ambassador Stone, you stand before us to petition for colonization rights to Nemesis 9. Are you aware that this world has already claimed the lives of 3 advanced civilizations' colonization attempts?" Jack smiled, the kind of smile that had made many alien species nervous over the years. It was the same smile his ancestors had worn when they first looked at mountains and decided to climb them, when they saw oceans and chose to cross them. "With all due respect, head counselor, I'm aware that 3 attempts were made using traditional methods. We propose something different." Jack pressed a button on his wrist device, and a hologram of the planet appeared in the center of the chamber. Nemesis 9 hung there like an angry red jewel, its surface covered in constant volcanic activity. The council members muttered as data scrolled past. Surface temperature, 480 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric pressure, 90 times Earth standard. Gravity, 1.8 Earth standard. Constant meteor impacts. Acid rain that could dissolve standard hull plating in hours. The Murith tried to establish dome cities. They lasted 2 weeks before the pressure crushed their shields. One council member called out. The Zendar attempted underground colonies. The volcanic activity buried them all. "And let's not forget the Krill's orbital platforms," another added. "The meteor storms destroyed them in less than a month. What makes humans think they can succeed where others failed?" Jack walked through the hologram, letting the angry red light play across his face. "Because we're not going to fight the planet. We're going to dance with it." The confusion in the chamber was almost palpable. The head counselor's skin rippled faster, a sign of agitation. "Explain." Every species that tried to colonize Nemesis 9 attempted to create safe zones by shutting out the environment. They tried to build walls against the impossible. Jack expanded the hologram, showing the planet's violent surface in detail. "We propose to do what humans have always done: adapt." He brought up images of Earth, the deep-sea thermal vents teeming with life, bacteria thriving in volcanic pools, creatures surviving in the most extreme pressures and temperatures. Our world taught us that life finds a way. More importantly, it taught us how to learn from that life. The chamber grew quiet as Jack continued. "We've spent the last 5 years developing technologies based on Earth's extremophiles, materials that get stronger under pressure, like the shells of deep-sea creatures. Living architecture inspired by heat-resistant bacteria. We don't plan to simply survive on Nemesis 9. We plan to thrive there." "Impossible," the head counselor stated flatly. "The conditions are too extreme. No sentient species can endure such an environment long-term." Jack's smile grew wider. "Impossible is just another word for something humans haven't done yet. We request permission to establish a proving ground on Nemesis 9. Give us 120 days. If we haven't established a viable colony by then, we'll withdraw and never petition for this world again." The council chamber erupted in debate. Some called it suicide. Others called it human madness. The head counselor raised their hands for silence once more. "You understand that if we grant this request, the council cannot guarantee any rescue mission should you fail. The conditions make standard emergency protocols impossible." "We understand. All volunteers know the risks." The head counselor's skin shifted to a deep blue, a sign of grave concern. "Very well. Let it be recorded that despite all warnings and evidence of certain doom, the humans persist in their request. Permission granted, Ambassador Stone." You have your 120 days. May whatever gods you believe in have mercy on your souls." As Jack turned to leave the chamber, he heard the whispers start again. But now they held a different tone. Not just dismissal, but a hint of curiosity. Maybe even a touch of wonder. Because despite everything they'd seen, despite all logic and reason, there was something in that human smile that made them wonder if maybe, just maybe, impossible wasn't quite as permanent as they'd thought. The real work would begin tomorrow. Jack had a team to assemble, and a death world to dance with. 3 days after the council meeting, Jack stood in a dimly lit room at the Earth's Space Command Center, looking at personnel files floating in the air around him. Each hologram showed faces of potential team members, their credentials and their experiences. He wasn't looking for the obvious choices. He needed the impossible ones. The door slid open with a soft hiss. "You wanted to see me." A woman with weathered skin and fierce eyes walked in. Her silver-streaked hair was tied back in a practical knot, and she wore the practical clothes of someone who spent more time in the field than in offices. "Rita Thompson." Jack nodded. "The woman who built working habitats in the methane seas of Titan. They said it couldn't be done. You did it anyway." "They always say it can't be done." Rita shrugged. "Gets boring after a while." She glanced at the holograms. "Nemesis 9. Now that's interesting. Count me in." Jack smiled. 1 down, 3 to go. The next meeting took place in the Martian underground caves. Marcus Bell was exactly where everyone said he'd be. Hands deep in red soil, studying geological samples. His dark skin was covered in Mars dust, and his laugh echoed through the cave when Jack mentioned the mission. A planet that's basically one giant volcanic pressure cooker. Marcus wiped his hands on his pants. The kind of place where the ground could melt your boots and the air could crush your bones. Finally, a real challenge. His enthusiasm was infectious, even as he listed all the ways the planet could kill them. Finding Thomas Reed proved trickier. The veteran terraformer had gone off-grid after his last project, tired of bureaucracy and paperwork. Jack tracked him to a remote research station in Antarctica, where he was developing new methods for extreme environment agriculture. "The council's right, you know," Thomas said, not looking up from his hydroponic garden. "It is impossible. At least, the way they're thinking about it." He finally turned, revealing a face lined with scars from old accidents and eyes that held a fierce intelligence. "Good thing we don't think like them." The last member of the team was already waiting in Jack's office when he returned to Space Command. Dana White sat with her feet up on his desk, reading technical specs for Nemesis 9 on her tablet. The xenobiologist had made her name studying life forms in Earth's most extreme environments. "Took you long enough," she said by way of greeting. "I've already started designing bio-inspired survival suits based on tardigrade DNA. Did you know there might be native bacteria on Nemesis 9? Everything we thought we knew about the limits of life could be wrong." Jack looked at his team gathered in the briefing room the next day. They were an odd bunch. Not the young, shiny heroes most people imagined for such missions. Each of them had failed before, learned hard lessons, and come back stronger. They had gray in their hair and scars on their hands. They had laugh lines around their eyes and stories that started with, "This might sound crazy, but..." "The council gave us 120 days, Jack explained, showing them the full planetary data. "They expect us to die trying. Any sane person would walk away." "Good thing we're not entirely sane," Marcus grinned, already sketching ideas for underground heat shields. Rita was running calculations on her tablet. "The pressure will be our biggest problem. But if we can use it instead of fighting it..." She trailed off, lost in technical possibilities. Thomas and Dana were already deep in discussion about adapting Earth extremophiles to create living barriers against the harsh conditions. Their excitement grew with each impossible problem they identified. "One last thing," Jack said, drawing their attention. "The Council's sending observers. They'll be watching from orbit, waiting for us to fail. Everything we do needs to work the first time. We won't get second chances. The team looked at each other, and a silent understanding passed between them. They weren't just fighting to survive on a death world. They were fighting to prove something fundamental about humanity itself. "Well," Dana said, pulling up more detailed scans of the planet's surface, "we better give them one hell of a show." As they dove into planning, the room filled with the energy of people doing what humans did best, taking on the impossible with a mix of science, stubbornness, and that peculiar human ability to look at certain death and see only possibilities. The human ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Nemesis 9's system. Through the main viewport, the planet glowed like an angry ember against the darkness of space. Two sleek Council observation vessels hung in high orbit, their crews watching with morbid curiosity. "It's even worse than the reports," Marcus said, studying the sensor readings. "Surface temperature is actually 520 degrees Celsius, not 480 degrees Celsius. The Council's data was out of date." He grinned. "Good thing we over-engineered everything." Rita stood at the environmental controls, making rapid adjustments. "The atmospheric density is incredible. Look at these readings. It's like trying to land in liquid metal." Her fingers danced across the console, tweaking their descent calculations. A massive explosion bloomed on the planet's surface, visible even from orbit. Thomas whistled low. "That's at least a Category 5 volcanic eruption. We've got eruptions like that happening every few hours across the whole surface." "The meteor storms are picking up too," Donna added, tracking multiple incoming objects on her screen. "We've got a swarm approaching from the northern hemisphere. Each one's big enough to punch through standard ship armor." Jack watched his team work, each of them facing what should have been overwhelming odds with calm precision. The Council observers had transmitted their landing coordinates, a relatively stable region near the equator. Relatively stable meaning it only had minor volcanic activity and acid rainstorms. "Beginning descent," Rita announced. "Everyone strap in. This is going to be interesting." The ship's special hull plating, designed based on deep-sea creature shells, began to glow as they hit the upper atmosphere. The descent was like nothing any of them had experienced before. The ship groaned and shuddered as layers of atmosphere pressed in with crushing force. Outside, acid rain pelted the hull like machine gun fire. They dodged 3 meteor strikes, each near miss making the Council observers gasp over the comm channel. "Hull integrity holding at 89%, Marcus reported. "Those carbon crystal lattices are performing better than expected." The ship's outer layer was actually getting stronger as the pressure increased, just as they designed. A burst of superheated gas from a nearby volcanic vent rocked the ship. Rita compensated instantly, using the thermal updraft to stabilize their descent. "Now that's what I call a crosswind," she muttered, her voice tight with concentration. They broke through the cloud layer, and for the first time, they saw the surface with their own eyes. Rivers of lava cut through black rock like glowing veins. Lightning storms flickered constantly in the poisonous atmosphere, while acid rain created strange, beautiful patterns in the air. "There's our landing zone." Jack pointed to a relatively flat expanse of rock. "How long until the next meteor swarm?" Dana checked her calculations. 17 minutes. "We need to be down and have the first shield layer deployed before then." They landed with a bone-jarring thud. The ship's landing struts, inspired by the shock-absorbing legs of jumping spiders, compressed and adapted to the uneven surface. External sensors began gathering data immediately. "Deploying base foundation," Thomas announced. He activated their first major innovation, a living concrete that used modified extremophile bacteria. The material spread from beneath the ship, hardening almost instantly in the intense heat and creating a stable platform. "Council observers are requesting status update," Marcus said, a hint of amusement in his voice. The aliens clearly expected them to be dead already. Jack keyed the comm. "Nemesis base to Council observers. Landing successful. Beginning Phase 1 deployment." He could almost hear their confusion through the silence that followed. The team moved with practiced efficiency, each performing their assigned tasks. Their survival suits, looking more like living armor than traditional space gear, adjusted constantly to the brutal conditions. Dana's biosensors were already detecting interesting readings from the planet's atmosphere, hints that Nemesis 9 might harbor more surprises than anyone suspected. A massive tremor shook the ground, and a geyser of lava erupted 2 kilometers away. The Council observers sent urgent warnings about imminent danger, but the human team barely noticed, too busy setting up their equipment and gathering data. Incoming meteor swarm in 5 minutes, Dana warned. Shield deployment is at 82% and holding steady. Jack watched his team work, each moving with purpose and determination. The Council thought they were witnessing humanity's latest failed attempt at the impossible. Instead, they were watching the beginning of something unprecedented. Humans doing what they did best, turning death worlds into opportunities. Right on schedule, Jack said, checking their timeline. Let's show them what impossible really means. 2 weeks into their mission on Nemesis 9, Dana stared at her sample readings in disbelief. She ran the test again, then a third time. Each result came back the same. Her hand shook as she called the team to the lab section of their base. "This better be good," Marcus said as he walked in, his boots leaving dark marks on the floor from the metallic soil outside. "I was in the middle of mapping a new lava flow system." The others filed in behind him, their faces showing mixture of curiosity and concern. Dana pointed to her microscope screen. "Look at this. Really look." The screen showed tiny structures moving in a drop of liquid collected from one of the deeper rock samples. The movements weren't random. They were purposeful. "That's impossible," Thomas whispered, leaning closer. "Nothing should be able to survive in that liquid. It's practically molten metal." "Exactly," Dana said, her eyes bright with excitement. "But these organisms aren't just surviving. They're thriving. They're using the extreme heat and pressure to power their life cycles. Everything we assumed about the limits of life was wrong." Jack studied the readings scrolling past the screen. "How many different types have you found?" 7 so far, and I'm detecting signs of more complex organisms deeper in the crust." Dana pulled up more data. "But here's the really interesting part. Their cellular structure is similar to extremophiles found in Earth's volcanic vents. They're using the same basic principles we used in our survival equipment, but they evolved it naturally." Rita had been quiet, her mind clearly racing. "If life evolved here naturally, then we've been thinking about this all wrong. We don't need to change the planet." She trailed off, looking at the others. "We need to change our approach," Jack finished. "The Council's previous colonization attempts failed because they tried to create Earth-like conditions, but these organisms show us a different way." The team gathered around the main planning table, their earlier tasks forgotten. Thomas pulled up the schematics for their current base design. "If we modify our structures to work with the pressure instead of against it, like these organisms do, we could reduce power consumption by 60%. Rita finished, already making calculations. "The pressure could become our friend instead of our enemy." Marcus pointed to several spots on the geological survey. "Look at these formations. If these organisms exist here, they'd probably exist throughout similar structures all over the planet. We could use them as markers for the most stable building locations." A violent tremor shook the base, making the lights flicker. Nobody flinched. They'd grown used to Nemesis 9's constant tantrums. Outside, acid rain drummed against the shields, creating an almost musical rhythm. "The Council observers are requesting their weekly update," Thomas mentioned, glancing at the communication panel. "Should we tell them?" Jack considered for a moment. "Not yet. Let's develop this further first. They'll want proof, and we'll give them something they can't dismiss." Dana was already setting up new experiments. "These organisms might be the key to everything. If we can understand how they process the heavy metals in the atmosphere, we might be able to adapt our own systems to do the same." The team worked through the night, their excitement growing with each new discovery. They found that the organisms didn't just survive in the extreme conditions. They needed them. The crushing pressure was part of their metabolic process. The acid rain provided essential nutrients. Even the constant meteor impacts played a role, bringing new materials to the surface that the life forms used. "Look at this," Donna called out several hours later. "They're responding to our presence. The colonies near our base are actually adapting to use our waste heat. They're not just surviving. They're cooperating with us." Jack watched his team work, each person building on the other's ideas. The council had sent them here expecting failure, but they'd found something far more valuable than just a way to survive. They'd discovered a whole new way of thinking about life itself. Another tremor rocked the base, stronger this time. Warning lights flashed, showing increased volcanic activity in the region. But instead of fear, the team felt something else: opportunity. Every challenge the planet threw at them was becoming a new chance to learn, to adapt, to grow. "Send a message to the council observers," Jack said finally. "Tell them we're ready for our first major expansion phase. Let's show them what's possible when you stop fighting a world and start learning from it instead." The inside of Nemesis Base had changed dramatically over the past month. What started as standard metal walls now pulsed with life, quite literally. Rita watched as the new bioengineered panels flexed and shifted, adapting to another pressure wave that rolled through the area. "The living walls are performing even better than expected," she said, checking the readings on her tablet. "Power consumption is down by 70%, and structural integrity has improved by a factor of 3. Marcus walked up beside her, his new environment suit moving like a second skin. Gone were the clunky pressure suits they'd started with. The new designs, based on Dana's research into the local life forms, looked more like flowing metal than traditional space gear. "You should see what's happening with the outer layers," he said, pulling up a holographic display. "The armor isn't just resistant to the acid rain anymore. It's actually processing it. We're turning the planet's own weapons into resources." Through the base's observation windows, they could see their latest project taking shape. Thomas stood in the middle of what would become the first expansion dome, directing the growth of new support structures. The materials responded to his commands through a neural interface, growing and reshaping themselves like living creatures. "Remember when we thought this world was trying to kill us?" Thomas called over the comm system. Turns out it was just waiting for someone who could speak its language. Jack entered the control room, followed by Dana. They'd been working on what might be their most ambitious project yet: the atmospheric processors. The machines looked more like giant artificial trees than traditional technology, their branches reaching up into the toxic sky. "The processing rate is stable," Dana reported, bringing up the latest data. "The organisms we discovered aren't just surviving in the atmosphere. They're actively cleaning it. We've modified their natural processes and scaled them up." A massive tremor shook the base, but nobody flinched anymore. The living walls absorbed the shock, actually growing stronger from the stress. Outside, a fresh lava flow approached one of their sensor stations. Instead of burning through it, the molten rock was diverted by fields of crystalline structures they'd grown using modified bacteria. "Council observers are requesting permission to send down a probe," Marcus said, checking the communications panel. "They want to verify our readings. Apparently, they don't believe the data we've been sending them." Jack smiled. "Let them. It's time they saw what's really possible here." The team gathered at the airlock as the Council's probe made its descent. It was a sleek, expensive piece of equipment, designed to survive extreme conditions. But compared to their adapted technology, it looked primitive. "Bet it doesn't last an hour," Thomas muttered. 30 minutes, Rita countered. "Their shielding isn't designed for these specific conditions." They watched as the probe landed and began its survey. Their own equipment had evolved far beyond its original design. The sensor arrays now looked like fields of metallic flowers, each bloom collecting and processing data while strengthening itself against the harsh environment. Dana's tablet beeped with new readings. "The local organisms are already trying to colonize the probe," she said with a laugh. They'd recognize it as a potential growth surface. Life here doesn't just endure, it spreads. Jack watched as their innovations continued to reshape the landscape around them. The impossible world was becoming their world, not through conquest, but through adaptation and understanding. Every problem they'd faced had become a solution waiting to be discovered. "Look at this," Rita called out, pointing to a new reading. "The atmospheric pressure around the base is actually helping to power our systems now. We're not just surviving the extreme conditions, we're using them to make us stronger." A meteor struck nearby, but instead of causing damage, it was caught in a field of energy-absorbing crystals they'd grown. The impact energy was collected and redirected into their power grid. What had once been a deadly threat was now just another power source. The Council probe lasted exactly 27 minutes before its systems failed. By then, the team had already salvaged its remains and were studying ways to improve their own designs based on its weaknesses. "Send a message to the Council," Jack said, as they watched another successful expansion take root in the hostile soil. "Tell them we're not just building a colony anymore. We're creating a whole new way of living. And if they're brave enough, we're ready to teach others how to do the same." The planet roared around them, its constant storms and eruptions a reminder of its power. But now, instead of fighting against it, they moved with it, danced with it, grew with it. They had turned the impossible into their home, not by conquering it, but by becoming part of it. The first warning came from deep underground. Marcus felt it before the sensors even registered, a change in the vibrations that constantly rumbled through Nemesis 9's crust. His eyes widened as he looked at the readings. "Everyone to emergency stations," he called over the base's comm system. "We've got something big coming. Really big." The team rushed to the control room as the ground began to shake more violently than they'd ever experienced. Through the reinforced windows, they could see new cracks appearing in the black rock plains surrounding their base. Red light leaked up from below. "The whole plate is shifting," Marcus explained, pointing to the geological scans. "That dormant supervolcano we detected when we landed. It's waking up." Rita's hands flew over the control panels, adjusting their base's defensive systems. "The pressure wave is off the charts. Even our adapted structures aren't rated for something this massive." Emergency alerts flashed across their screens as the Council observation ships detected the building catastrophe. Their voices came through filled with panic. "Evacuate immediately. No structure can survive what's coming. You have maybe 30 minutes before the entire region is consumed." Jack looked at his team. They'd known this day might come, the day when Nemesis 9 would test them with everything it had, but they'd prepared for it in ways the Council couldn't imagine. "Donna, how are the deep shelters looking?" he asked. She checked the readings from their underground sanctuary, built using everything they'd learned about the planet's native life. "The bacterial reinforcement layers are holding. The heat exchangers are ready. We can do this." Thomas was already activating their newest systems, massive structures that looked like metallic roots diving deep into the planet's crust. "The thermal taps are in position. If this works like we planned." Another violent shake threw them all off balance. Outside, the sky had turned from its usual angry red to a deep, terrifying crimson. Lightning flashed constantly through clouds of volcanic ash that were beginning to fill the air. "Council ships are ordering us to evacuate," Rita reported. "They're saying we're all going to die if we stay." She couldn't help but smile at the familiar warning. Jack keyed the comm. "Nemesis Base to Council observers. We appreciate your concern, but we're staying. In fact, we're about to demonstrate why humanity succeeds where others fail." They moved quickly, activating systems and protocols they'd prepared for exactly this scenario. The base's outer layers began to shift and flow, transforming into more heat-resistant configurations. Deep anchors, inspired by the roots of Earth's oldest trees, dug further into the bedrock. First lava flow approaching from the south, Marcus called out. The molten rock moved like a glowing river, but their defenses were ready. The crystalline barriers they'd grown split the flow, channeling its energy into their collection systems. Temperature rising, Dana reported. Air quality critical outside. Activating the new atmospheric processors. The huge processing towers around their base came alive, their biomechanical systems working overtime to maintain a breathable bubble around them. They weren't fighting against the volcano. They were using its power, just as the native organisms did. A deafening roar filled the air as the supervolcano began to erupt. The ground cracked open less than a kilometer from their position, spewing molten rock high into the toxic atmosphere. The council observers watched in horror, certain they were about to witness the end of the human mission. Instead, they saw something unprecedented. The human base began to sink, not in defeat, but with purpose. The entire structure descended into the reinforced caverns they'd prepared, while their energy collection systems absorbed the volcano's fury. Power intake at 300% of normal, Thomas announced with excitement. The thermal taps are working better than we ever expected. We're not just surviving this, we're harnessing it. The base settled into its underground configuration, protected by layers of living rock and bioengineered barriers. The team watched through their sensor feeds as the surface above them transformed into a hell that would have killed any normal colony. But they were no longer normal colonists. Send final status update to the council, Jack ordered as they secured their positions. Tell them we're not just riding out the storm, we're using it to power our next phase of expansion. This isn't our end, it's our upgrade. The ground continued to shake, the volcano continued to rage, but deep in their reinforced shelter, the human team worked calmly at their stations. They had turned what should have been certain death into their greatest opportunity yet, because that's what humans did. They took the impossible and made it routine. The council chamber fell silent as Jack Stone walked in, exactly 120 days after their first landing on Nemesis 9. He didn't wear the simple black suit from his previous appearance. Instead, he wore the living armor they'd developed, its surface rippling slightly as it adapted to the room's atmosphere. Behind him came his team, each wearing similar suits. Their armor wasn't just protective gear, it was a statement. They had become something new, shaped by their time on the Death World, just as they had shaped it to their needs. The head counselor's silvery skin flickered with barely contained emotion. Ambassador Stone, you stand before us to present your final report on the Nemesis 9 colonization attempt. Not attempt, Jack corrected with a smile. Success. He activated his wrist device, and the chamber filled with holographic images of their colony. The council members murmured in disbelief as they saw the impossible. Where there had been only volcanic wasteland, now stood a network of living structures that pulsed with energy and purpose. During the supervolcanic event, Rita explained, our base didn't just survive, it evolved. The energy we harvested let us expand our operations by 400%. She showed them images of the new underground cities, built not to resist the planet's fury, but to channel it. Marcus stepped forward, pointing to geological readings. We've mapped the entire planetary volcanic network. We can predict and harness every eruption, every pressure change. The planet's violence has become our power source. Impossible, one council member declared. Our observers monitored your readings. The conditions during the eruption exceeded all survivable limits. Limits, Dana laughed softly. We found life thriving in conditions you called impossible. Then we learned from it. She displayed images of their new hybrid technologies, living machines that grew stronger under pressure and heat that should have destroyed them. Thomas brought up schematics of their atmospheric processors. We're not just surviving in the toxic atmosphere, we're transforming it. Give us 5 years, and we'll have processing centers across the entire planet, each one powered by the very conditions that made this world deadly. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some members called it trickery, others demanded proof. The head counselor raised all 4 hands for silence. We have verified your data, they admitted reluctantly. But surely this success cannot be replicated. You were merely fortunate. Jack smiled that familiar human smile. That's why we're here. We're not just reporting our success. We're offering to share it. He showed them plans for a training center on Nemesis 9, designed to teach other species their methods. The living architecture, the adaptive technology, the new ways of thinking about hostile environments, all of it open to those willing to learn. You said this world would kill us, Jack continued. Instead, it taught us. Every challenge made us stronger. Every impossible condition became an opportunity. And now we're offering to teach others how to do the same. The head counselor's skin shifted through patterns of confusion and disbelief. You would share these technologies, these methods. Of course, Rita said. That's another thing that makes humans different. We don't just overcome challenges. We teach others how to do it too. Marcus pulled up images of potential colonies on other impossible worlds. Nemesis 9 was just the beginning. There are dozens of worlds you've written off as uninhabitable. We can show you how to thrive on every one of them. The chamber filled with excited whispers. Species that had long ago accepted their limitations began to see new possibilities. The human team stood quietly, letting their success speak for itself. One last thing, Jack said, drawing everyone's attention again. We've received requests from 300 human colonists wanting to join us on Nemesis 9. They call it the next great adventure. We'd like approval to begin permanent settlement operations. Dana grinned at the council's shocked reaction. Turns out there are a lot of humans who think living on an impossible world sounds like fun. The head counselor stared at them for a long moment. You have changed more than just one world, Ambassador Stone. You have changed how we think about possibility itself. That's what humans do, Jack replied simply. We redefine impossible. Now, who's ready to learn how? As the council chamber erupted in a flood of questions and requests, Jack looked at his team. They had done more than survive on a death world. They had turned it into a gateway for a new age of exploration and cooperation. Because in the end, impossible wasn't a wall to stop at. It was just the beginning of another human adventure.